Starcraft 2 5.0.14 Public Test Realm Balance Patch Update. About a week ago, the Starcraft 2 Community Balance Council released their first iteration of a new balance patch to the game. To mixed reviews, putting it nicely. But we've got a new version, so again, we're going to go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this time around, I'm pretty happy to say it's mostly in that order. So smash that like button, maybe subscribe, and get your comments ready to hold off a bit, because we're diving in. Greetings from the StarCraft 2 Community Balance Council. First off, we'd like to thank everyone for providing feedback on and testing the previously proposed changes. We'd also like to reassure that the balance updates are a joint effort from the entire community, and your feedback is very important for the direction the council's heading. Upon analyzing the perception, that's a nice way to put it, of the first iteration of this balance patch and the games played on the PTR, we'd like to make the following adjustments. So there will be a full changelog, all the summary, all the changes further on. But so you don't have to go back and watch my first video, though you can if you'd like. But we're going to go over the changes from that first. Battery overcharge removal remains. Shield battery overcharge removed, replaced by energy recharge, which restores 100 energy on a unit on a 1-minute global cooldown. So after receiving playtest and feedback, we see that many players have enjoyed the flexibility of the new ability. Flexibility provided by the new ability. That's a sentence. And we'd like to continue testing this proposed change. There's been a strong concern about Protoss defense after losing battery overcharge, specifically against Terran rushes. So we'll be testing the following changes to improve the Protoss's ability to defend in these scenarios. So these changes are specifically to make it a little bit less terrible for Protoss to survive, to take advantage of the new change. Cyclone has been reverted. The last two Balance Council changes, the Phoenix level identity crisis. This brings it back to the Tech Lab Fast and Furious version. So less Cyclones, more damage. We're going to have some demonstrations later, but I want to get through all the changes. As well as the Stalker train time from the Gateway. Not the Warp Gate. Hold your Terran horses. Which I think they're all Terran horses, but just from the Gateway. So before Warp Gate finished, like the first 2 to 3 Stalkers, max. The idea here being improving Protoss early game build diversity and stability, as well as addressing builds like 2-Rax Marauder. So I do think these will change the early game of Protoss versus Terran. The old Cyclone is very strong, but there will be a lot less of it. So I personally think with the energy recharge ability, things like Phoenix openers are going to become a lot more common since the Widow Mine has been slightly nerfed. Relatively recently, they may become a bit more of a staple, especially considering the old Cyclone is very strong against individual gateway units, but things like Phoenixes can still kind of soft counter it. So we'll see. Interesting changes, and I'm gonna, just an aside, it's very important that they're willing to do this. So the kind of ridiculous essay of, let's just throw this in here. We got Wikipedia up. In case you're wondering how the Cyclone has been changed, it's been changed a little bit. In the history of the Cyclone, you don't need to read these. You just need to look at the wall of text. So, the 5.0.11 version is the Tech Lab version. Very strong against individual units, but easily overwhelmed and pretty solidly locked into that early game niche. Though we'll see if there are any unintended side effects, or maybe slightly intended side effects against Zerg. Late game concerns. The Ghost. 2 to 3 supply. Mothership no longer targeted by Abduct. Well, nice to see it. So, with the release of the PTR, we've received additional feedback from pro gamers and community members. Ghost power level seems to be too high for their cost and supply, despite multiple targeted nerfs. Following this feedback, that would be a change. Feedback. I'd like to directly adjust the Terran Army's late game strength through this change. Alright, so this is a significant nerf to Terran versus Zerg. and a minor one against Protoss. Because against Zerg, how many ghosts do you have? The ideal late game, somewhere around 20. So 20 more supply of ghosts is a solid 2 full medevacs of Marines. It's a half dozen Liberators. It's same amount of siege tanks. That is a significant reduction in the total strength of the Terran army. And you need, to an extent, that many ghosts to help deal with many of the late game options from Zerg. Need might be a bit of a strong word on it, but nobody, even if it is required, I think I could speak for the overwhelming majority of at least spectators. Watching the entire Zerg army get gunned down by a musket line of ridiculously effective spellcasters, not necessarily sparking joy. Watching a Zerg throw twice as many resources at the Terran and only occasionally breaking through. So there's a middle ground to be struck, but having only ghosts as the army, I don't think was the ground we wanted to stay on. But here's the thing. While this is a significant buff to Zerg, it isn't as much an effect in Terran versus Protoss. Because 2 ghosts can wipe out effectively all the energy and pretty much all the shields of every single Protoss unit. So I have suggested, and I actually saw a version of the change, nerf EMP flight time. Accelerate, give it the fungal treatment. Did you know EMP's a projectile? Fun fact, a lot of people don't know that because it's so ridiculously fast. But this person, who apparently knows how to change the map editor, but does not know how to record things not on their phone, looking at their computer screen. But yes, if you nerf the projectile speed, as well as acceleration, now that doesn't change the fact that having enough ghosts, you can blanket the entire Protoss army. But that is without actually changing the strength of EMP, or making it do damage over time, which I like as well, but I think that's something worthy of testing, if only to let people realize that it's a projectile in the first place. It's almost insulting how fast it is. So, I think we could go just a little bit further and maybe try that out. But, obviously, I said in my last video, if I could have one thing for the Ghost, it would be 3 supply. Because while it doesn't directly address the strength of the Ghost, if you directly nerf the Ghost, admittedly, and as annoying as it is to watch the Ghost just win games almost on its own, there's nothing else. So, I do begrudgingly acknowledge that it's needed. But if you saw an army of 20 Infestors, if you saw an army of 20 High Templar, you'd be asking, what are they doing? Are they throwing? Why did you spend so much money on these things that are useless? You see an army of 20 Ghosts, you're like, did he win the game? The disparity is a bit ridiculous. And part of it is the fact that the Ghost is a strong, if the Ghost didn't have any spells, maybe Cloak only, and nukes, there would still be some scenarios to use it, because its auto attack is so good. It is a very strong anti-light unit. It isn't better than just having more Marines or anything like that, especially with the supply, but it's just so good. So I'd like to test out that. I like those indirect sort of changes that are very obvious for spectators. Like, if EMP was a obvious projectile, that'd be a lot more interesting to see Max Packs, probably only Max Packs, blink out of it. Or pick up his High Templar just in time or something like that. Especially with the nerf to the Disruptor. But I digress. But of course, we can't just nerf the Ghost. We must also... Okay, here you go, Terrans. Ultras catching strays because they're larger than your mother, so even after the diet plan. Ultralisk speed upgrade move speed bonus reduced. We'd like to test a slight reduction in move speed of Ultras, bring it down to the same speed as Steam Marines and Marauders. This is to try and make Terran players feel more comfortable. End of line. Oh, and moving out on the map, in the late game, as well as balance out increases in strength and the push priority change. So the Ultras can now shove other units out of the way. We're going to go over all those changes. But, okay. Fine. Ultras were just terrorizing. I wanna buff to Ultras against Protoss, but they get obliterated by Immortals still, so. Remove changes. Broodlord, Tempest, Liberator. So those ridiculous changes to the Liberator, where it had a radius about 3/4 of the screen. The Broodlord Broodling having more HP, as well as having higher attack speed on the Broodlord, as well as the Tempest damage point, which is just the time when you release the attack. Of these, not sure why the Tempest got included. Feels like, alright, everybody put up your Nerf. The Tempest also catching strays here. I don't think there was any problem with having that damage point. The big issue with the Tempest is not the damage point, it's the overkill. The Tempest takes like 17 years to charge up its big-ass energy ball, and then it unleashes it alongside 7 of its brother Tempests. Or sister Tempests, I'm not sure, or whatever. Doesn't matter. And obliterates that one drone. The overkill and the projectile speed and targeting of the Tempest, that is really the big issue with using Tempests, especially in medium to large numbers, is their damage efficiency is and more like small to medium numbers, because when you have 10 Tempests and they're auto-attacking, it's not as bad as when you have 5 Tempests and you're really trying to snipe things off. But they're constantly all attacking like the same Marine or Hydra or something. So, I'm not sure why the Tempest got included here, but I guess Protoss needed something removed. Other changes. Hydra. Dash. Name not finalized. The Hydra Lurch ability. Still not good, but it's kind of amusing. Still takes Hive Tech. The problem is that Hydras, when you have, let's select all armies as Zerg. I know, right? Typical Zerg. Hydras do not take spellcaster priority, which means you cannot access that ability unless you don't have any of these units, or you can't easily activate this ability unless you don't have Queens, Vipers, Roaches, Ravagers, Lurkers, or Overseers. Those units all take priority, so you have to individually hotkey or select your Hydras. I know, it doesn't sound like that big a deal, but considering Hydras are pretty low on the list of things you want to be individually microing in super late game Zerg fights, it's hard to justify caring about this too much. Lurker health reduction in order to make disruptors still two-shot it, and sight range increase in order to make them more consistent. Missile turret salvage removed, but sensor tower salvage remains. Blue flame and spine crawler buffs removed, mostly because Zergs would get murdered on both fronts. Those were kind of out there. I kind of like the idea, but I think in the grand scheme of things, they did feel weirdly out of place in how they worked. So, now, full updated changelog. Alright. I made it this far without coughing directly into the microphone, so please like and subscribe to support. So I'm getting over being sick. Really wanted to get this out there, though, so we're going to timestamp right as I'm ready to jump into this, because I think most people will be jumping here anyways, but thank you for making it this far. The full updated changelog. We're just going to go right through and then talk about the implications at the end. Protoss Nexus battery overcharge removed. Now has energy recharge, which recharges 100 energy to any unit or structure within 8 range of the Nexus. The shield battery HP and shields increase from 150 to 200. The Stalker train time from Gateway, not Warp Gate, reduced from 30 to 27 seconds. Colossus shields and HP change from 150, 200 to 100 shields and 250 HP. Tempest supply cost reduced from 5 to 4. And its air attack range reduced to 13. Immortal cost reduced from 275, 100 250, 100. But weapon cooldown increased by about 10%. That means lower attack speed. Disruptor. Purification Nova Radius increased from 1.375 to 1.5. So what it was a couple patches ago. But damage is reduced from 145 to a total of 200 against shields to 100, a total of 200 against shields. So we'll no longer one-shot Marauders or Roaches, but we'll still one-shot pretty much every Protoss unit but an Archon or an Immortal. Mothership. Cost increase back to 400, 400. Supply cost increase. No longer targeted by Abduct. And damage now done on all the beams. It can target 4 units at a time. It looks really cool. Terran. Cyclone. Reverted to patch 5.0.11. That's Sniper Clone. Salvage. Damage now cancels it. So nerf to bunker rushes. Salvage timer now visible to enemies. Salvage now available on bunkers and sensor towers. Planetary Fortress. Armor reduced from 3 to 2. Sensor tower cost reduction from 125, 100 to 150. And radar range significantly reduced. 27 to 22, which is a pretty significant amount based on trigonometry stuff. Orbital Command. Oh, it can now be salvaged. Orbital Command, call down extra supplies. It increases supply depot's current / max health to 500. And even if that's 1 HP, that means it heals it back to 500. Just important to note. Ghost supply cost increased from 2 to 3. And the Thor, explosive payload, splash damage mode, increased baseline, increased splash radius with less drop-off, but significantly decreased range. Meanwhile, Zerg, the Queen, cost increased from 150 to 175 minerals. Hatchery, cost reduced from 300 to 275 minerals. Spore Crawler, baseline damage increased from 15 to 20, whereas its health is reduced from 400 to 300. Hydra's, muscular augment creep speed bonus, so that's Hydra speed. Reduced, so less speed on creep, but it gets an upgrade to lurch forward occasionally, called Frenzy, or whatever we're going to call it. I like Hydra Lurch. Super Slither. Either way. Infestor Microbial Shroud now lasts for 3.6 seconds on units leaving the shroud. And Ultralisk Push Priority changed from 0 to 1 and pushes allied units out of the way. Maybe it wasn't working in team games. Zerg barely works in team games anyways. And move speed bonus reduced. Orbital Command, and now bug fixes, quality of life. Orbital Command Scanner Sweep now uses Team Color. Seems like they removed the Sensor Tower version because it was very hard to see on the minimap. Command Center, Nexus, and Hatchery now auto-rally to mineral fields. It does it the moment you place the building, important to note. It isn't when it finishes. So if you were reflexively changing it, but essentially you just don't need to touch it anymore. But I can't help myself. Like after nearly 15 years, the reflex to select it and then click on the minerals. There's no getting out of that one. Workers waiting for refinery extractor similar to do not count as idle. Cool. SCV random delay makes it a little easier to consistently deal with SCVs, but icon to command cards to show unupgraded passive upgrades. That's very helpful. Siege tank and immortal tracking change reverted. This is not a nerf. It actually is kind of a consistency buff from what I can tell. And it doesn't have huge gameplay effects, but I might not know the details behind the scenes. Blinding cloud bugs fixed. Issuing orders in the fog, somewhat fixed. Charge zealot. Move animation speed. Sometimes they can go crazy. Hydralisk move animation speed to match its speed. An issue where graviton beam could be canceled. Interesting. Yeah, the Phoenix always had a little bit of an issue where it might pick up things and then cancel it. And the Lurker's attack being canceled when the target leaves range and died. No other unit is in attack range. Alright, so quality of life changes this time are mostly exactly that. The auto rally is definitely something that's much more for, not Cyril, so. Okay. Now it's opinions time. We've got all our changes. So, net change. Much better. This makes a lot more sense. Is it good enough? There's still room for improvement. My general feelings to start. Protoss is going to be much better, or not much better, but better at the things it's already good at. Which are power spikes. With energy recharge, with things like the mothership, with the nerfs to queens. This will continue to allow Protoss to get that strong moment where they overwhelm their opponent. Whether it's with Storm, whether it's with Blink Stalkers, whether it's with Sky Toss. The problem is, this doesn't do anything to make Protoss more it doesn't smooth out the Protoss. It's, Protoss sad, and then Storm or Blink finishes, and then sad again, and then Sky Toss comes out. Like, nothing here makes the basic Protoss army, especially against Terran. In fact, almost exclusively against Terran. This is mostly a buff to Max Pax killing Clem before Clem has 100 supply, is how I look at these changes. I think Protoss will have some interesting openers, but between the Disruptor nerf, the Immortal being slightly nerfed overall, the Colossus, this is hilarious. This does not actually solve the problem, or really even touch the problem of the 120 to 180 supply Protoss army getting easily put down by a similar supply of Terran, even with the Ghosts. Because the problem for the Ghosts against Protoss is less the number or the supply and the effectiveness of EMP. So I would like to see that EMP change. Now, I think these are steps in the right direction. The Purification Nova, the Disruptor has never been an incredible... The Disruptor has always been amazing against everyone except for those it's not amazing against. It's such a polarizing unit in every way. But it's necessary. But with the Disruptor no longer killing Marauders in one hit, yes, it'll still kill Ghosts. The amount of effort it takes to make it work. Maybe with energy recharge, just there will be slightly less Ghosts. And having... So, here's my proposal. Energy recharge. Right now, both for spectators and for players, is not great. Why is it not great? Okay, let me show you in a scenario. We're all on the same team here. I got EMP'd. Give me my energy back. I got EMP'd again. So, you still have enough energy for Storm in this case. And it's very strong, especially against Zerg, because you warp in a High Templar. It has 75 or 50 energy. You drop another 100 energy on it. Boom, 150. That's 2 Storms. Just warped in. My proposal is we change this to 5 seconds. Alright? 1, the animation is really hard to see. Especially if you're not looking for it, both either as a spectator, or as an opponent. Like, say we're in the middle of this. Get EMP'd. Oh, the cooldown's still up, but if the energy recharge is 20 energy per second over 5 seconds, or pick a number, maybe you could switch targets, or you just drop it all, but that animation is almost impossible to see. In fact, it's kind of hard to tell if you misclicked it, even if you're the player. So, I like the idea. It adds a lot of strategic variety. I think Phoenix openers are going to become a lot stronger. The limiting factor on the Oracle is not energy. Like, a lot of people think Oracle openers because everyone does Oracle openers and has for years. But I think of all the things to bring Phoenix back against Terran, this will be it. Because a Phoenix having 3 lifts to start is much, much, much more important than an Oracle having another 100 energy. Because the Oracle is almost never limited by the amount of energy it has. It's limited by the fact it just dies to everything, including a Widow Mine. So, Phoenix Openers, I think, significantly buffed. And honestly, well, the problem still remains. It will make Protoss stronger in the early game when it's already mostly strong. If you can survive any sort of Terran All-In in that very early mid-game with either Blink or Stargate, the Terran has to kind of turtle in their base. But then they come out with a few ghosts, some tanks, and a bunch of bio, and there's almost no army that can cost-efficiently trade. And this doesn't help them, because EMP will still wipe out all of the shields and all of the energy on your Phoenixes, on your Sentries, on your High Templar, and that doesn't address that issue. I think making energy recharge over time, as well as making EMP not even less effective, just slower, will give high-level Protoss a little bit more of a chance to survive it, and then give lower-level Terrans still plenty of ability to deal with it. I'm getting too worked up here. So, another thing. The major issue, and we're going to go back to this. I just want to point this out. This is the race distribution in Grandmaster on Europe of the Starcraft 2 ladder. Green is Protoss, blue is Terran, red is Zerg. So based on this, we should buff Zerg super hard, right? But this is what a lot of players are working off of. I bring up Europe because it's the most competitive with the most competitive players. And probably, I don't know the exact number, but since Koreans apparently rarely participate in the Balance Council because of language barrier, and there are the amount of North American players who are competitive at the high level I can count on one hand, Europe is by far and most of them play on Europe to practice anyway, so this is the most relevant server. So at some point, Protoss is 50% of GM. It's still the majority. And when you go to the top players in the game, here on Aligulac, if you look at the top, you'll see not too many Protoss, but you start scrolling down, and so the major issue is Protoss is very good against everyone who isn't the very best. And making them stronger in these kind of spiky moments, and spiky moments, to be clear, are very important. Like, that's the excitement. Like, will Storm finish? Will he land the shots? Will he micro well enough to mitigate either the disruptors or the EMP? But you don't want the game to feel on a timer either. Because if you're on a timer, you only get two options. Either you fail the timer and lose the game, or you turtle and hope to outlast them. There's no back and forth in that scenario. So now, I'm not really offering solutions. I'm just trying to point out the problem mostly. Yep. Shut up, Ghost. I don't think this, and the nerf to the Immortal. Here's the thing about the Immortal, too. Immortals are amazing against Zerg. Immortal, like, with this patch, I've played a few dozen games on either side. I'm no Grandmaster, at least reliably, as Protoss or Zerg. But playing against Skytoss just got that much harder. Playing against the Immortal kind of Templar composition. Yes, many Protoss hate lurkers, but there's no real other options for the Zerg. So, unless you're Cyril or Dark, it's in a very odd spot. So, the Immortal, I think, is a unit that needs some love. And I'm not sure how. Because you have to be careful, because it's already one of the best units against Zerg. Between Storm, clearing out units that Immortals suck against, and Immortals clearing out the rest, it becomes part of an incredible unit composition. But against Terran, like, if it's not hitting targets like Marauders or Siege Tanks, it's so specialized, and it suffers from that issue of just being so specialized. So, I'm not sure how you fix it. I've been a proponent of making bonus damage versus, and yes, let's discriminate against race. Don't demonetize me, YouTube. Instead of versus armored, damage. 20, 30 versus Terran. 20 versus Zerg. 25 versus Protoss. 50 versus armored. 2 shots Marines. Something like that. I think a lot of these problems could be solved by testing something like that. I'm not exactly sure. It's been kind of a philosophical difference. If you go to Age of Empires 2, and you might be like, Age of Empires 2, everything and its mother has, like, bonus damage. Let's just take a look. So, AoE 2, here's the tech tree. Like, for example, the Eagle Warrior is an example of this. It has 8 damage against monks, 7 baseline, 3 against siege unit. It's like 6 different modifiers here. Some units have very specific things against just one other unit. There's like hundreds in the game. So I want to dispel with the idea that it would make it too confusing. I think there's room to test that out. I know that's a much more outlandish and literally game-changing thing. But unless we're willing to rework Warp Gate, I think a middle ground would actually be testing out damage versus, instead of trying to be like armored, like for example, the Spore Crawler does extra damage against biological air. Who has biological air? It wasn't a hard question. It wasn't a trick question. It's just Zerg. That is, it's either Zerg or when your Protoss teammate lifts a like a Marine within range of your Spore Crawler in 2v2, then technically that's also biological air. Though I'm not sure that actually applies. Doesn't matter and is not relevant. We've never cared about 2v2. We're not starting now. So there's no conclusion here, but I do not think these patch changes will help much in that mid to late game, though it may make it even harder for your less world champion level Terrans to survive to that stage. We will see. Now, I want to shift gears significantly and talk about Terran versus Zerg. I think these are mostly good changes. The Lurker, slightly nerfed. Microbial Shroud is irrelevant. The Ultra, slightly nerfed. But the Ghost change is pretty huge. That and Planetary Fortress armor means that it's just that much harder to turtle against Zerg. I think a major issue with the late game is not the Viper, but Neural Parasite. That's part of the reason you can't go for a lot of the stronger, like Mass Thor as consistently, or Liberators or Battle Cruisers even, is because Neural Parasite on the Infestor is so effective. And that is kind of a side note as to why ghosts are so important and why you see these Ghost Liberator compositions, because neither of those things is easily countered by the Infestors with Neural Parasite. So we will see, but I honestly think TVZ not in too terrible a spot. We'll see if the Queen nerf and the Hydra nerf make the mid-game that much more of a nightmare. Because none of this was all of this will make it harder for Zergs to defend tank timings. But that brings me to a completely... Yeah, we're all over the place on this one. I don't know how much longer I can keep talking for. I'm feeling it, but... Maps. The biggest change every few months, well, more than a few months, is maps. This is the win rate in professional games of Terran against Zerg. And I say Terran against Zerg because that is by far the matchup most affected by maps. The most interactions that are affected by maps is Terran against Zerg. This is Dynasty. The map with the little gold base over to the side. Terran has a 62% win rate. There aren't that many games on it. Because most Zergs, I think, veto it. But let's go to a little more common, Crimson Court. 66% win rate for Terran against Zerg. How about Ghost River? 60% win rate for Terran. Yes, relatively low sample size. Okay, so what do these maps share? Zerg is unable to expand reliably. That is why. They only have one real option for a third base with an asterisk on these maps. Their fourth base is also pretty clear, and the angle to attack it, as well as having sets of rocks and choke points. So this is 3 maps. You might be like, well, what about the other maps? Well, there's Post-Youth, which Zerg is slightly more favored, because on this map, you have a lot of options for a fourth base. There's a lot of open space to work with. And even though the rush distance is pretty short, and you can get a free second base as Terran or Protoss, well, wow, this one has 60% Terran win rate against Protoss. How about Golden Aura, which is a much more standard. Zerg actually wins more often, 51%. Oceanborn, almost exactly 50% in TVP. Oceanborn, beautiful map. Also the most aggressively milquetoast standard map out there. But guess what? There's a reason we have those. Because across the board, it's within the margin of error of 50%. What other maps? Alcyone. 53% for Terran. But another map where you have options for expanding. Now these statistics, to be clear, don't really discredit, like Clem versus Cyril is not weighted higher than who are we going to throw under the bus? Kira versus Lambo. Which still very high level, but not at that same tier. So at this point, I just want to compare. Is there a map that is heavily Zerg favored that we rarely see because of it? What maps am I missing? Gonna rack my brain a little. I think there's a way to see the current maps on the ladder. Oh yeah, it's down at the bottom of the page. Amphion, 53% for Zerg. Dynasty, Ghost River, Golden Aura, Post-Youth, Site Delta. And there you go. So the highest win rate for Zerg is 54% in pro games. The highest win rate for Terran is 66%. This is not so much because of, and I didn't even check Terran versus Protoss, which also is heavily affected by maps. Terran has a 57% win rate here. I'm not going to get into the exact stats. I'm not sure if there's something, like Protoss doesn't benefit exactly from, they're in the middle ground. You don't want it to be too open because then you die to Zerg and it's hard to cover all your bases. But you also don't want it to be too closed because then your units, which have less range than the Terrans, can be exploited. Terrans actually benefit from a concave against Protoss there because you have Zealots, you have Archons, other things that kind of get stuffed up. So it makes it difficult to actually deal with. On top of the fact that any maps that have a lot of rocks and mineral walls and cliffs are just naturally favored for Liberators and Siege Tanks and other terrain-breaking things that we've literally referenced in patch notes before. So I don't want to spend this entire time talking about geography and cartography, but I do, before I want to go back to talking about like the Zerg changes and how they're minor yet important, I want to point out that all these kind of pale in comparison to the maps. Like having a map pool with 9 maps, but having 5 of those maps heavily favored towards one race. So that brings me to my final point, which is the Liberator. The Liberator breaks maps. It always has, and if in its current iteration, it always will. So, very good thing we didn't change it even more, but I think we can attribute a lot of these struggles to the Liberator overall. Now, the one matchup, I'm trying to keep it coherent here because I know I'm bouncing around, but a lot of things are popping into my head, and I'm trying to put them all in the right order. So, let's summarize. Zerg versus Terran is much more affected by maps than the actual interactions between units, especially before the Ghost nerf, because even if you could get a ton of Ghosts, if you can get overrun easily, on wide open spaces. It becomes a lot harder to turtle into those ghosts. Terran versus Protoss, on the other hand, is less map dependent. It's more timing dependent. Now, if you're extra vulnerable to tank pushes early, then Protoss has to take extra care in certain scenarios, but much more about how much damage did you take before your Blink Stalkers hit, for example. Like, did the early Cyclone push before Warp Gate finished kill 7 probes or 0? And that really defines how the rest of the game plays out. I'm just throwing a lot out there. And I know it's a bit all over the place. I even wrote down some notes and I kind of failed to keep up with them. But the summary is, these changes don't go far enough to help Protoss in the later game, and they might go a little too far to help it against Zerg and against Terran in the early game. Terran, we need to take off the kid gloves and bring out, like, the middle school gloves. Like, EMP can be a little slower, maybe. Not sure about the new old Cyclone. We'll see how that plays out. And the Liberator may be in store for a rework of some kind at some point if we actually want to change maps and not have the same thing. But it's much better. Okay. Final thoughts before I ramble for too long. It's good. Not great. I like the direction we're headed. I don't like how every Protoss change feels like it needs to have some sort of counter nerf. And to an extent, kind of the same for Zerg. Terran could use some changes that make non-super late game units strong or stronger, but that's always a dangerous game as well. But it's a solid, like, 8 out of 10. Maybe Terran versus Protoss, 7 out of 10. Terran versus Zerg, 8 out of 10. Zerg versus Protoss is going to be back to, like, 7 or 6. Because this is a significant buff, in my opinion, to Protoss against Zerg, which is a matchup they already were doing quite well in. More than a buff to Protoss against Terran in the later game. So we'll see. And yes, even with the Spore Crawler damage increase and all that, I think Protoss is going to have even more options. Now, with slightly worse Hydras and costly Queens, it's going to be a little harder to deal with that mid and especially late game Protoss. But thank you for sticking with me throughout this mostly rambling analysis of the new update. I'll be continuing to outline my thoughts and play some more games. I played a bunch of games on the second channel, Winter Gaming TV, by the way, if you want to check them out from yesterday. And I look forward to casting some more games in the near future, and providing you with some updated commentary. But let me know what you think. This is one important. The Balance Council is taking at least some criticism and feedback from the community. And I'll continue to do my best to try to keep it coherent and constructive. And I hope you will as well. So thank you for watching. I'm going to go take like a 6-hour nap because my voice is not going to be happy with me after this one. But thank you for watching. I hope I made your day a little bit better. I hope you're looking forward to the new Starcraft 2 significantly more than you were a week ago. I know I am. So thank you for watching. Good luck, have fun. I'll see you next time. Stay chill.